Chapter 18 is going to be about how your health can be influenced by the diet, in particular, the immune system. So the first thing we're going to look at is the immune system. Before we get into the details, let's look at a few new terms. We have the term antigen, which is something that the body views as a foreign object. And then we have antibody, which is what the body makes to fight that antigen. Now remember, we said each antibody is specialized. It is only meant to fight a certain type of antigen. If we have a new antigen introduced, we need to make new antibodies specialized to fight that antigen. Now let's take a look at what the immune system is composed of. The immune system is made of white blood cells, and then white blood cells can be broken down into a few different categories. The two main categories are lymphocytes and phagocytes. And then lymphocytes can be further broken down into B cells and T cells. Phagocytes can also be neutrophils or macrophages. So let's go ahead and take a look at how the immune system is actually going to function. We start off with B cells, which are going to recognize the antigen when it enters the body. As a response, they're going to start to multiply and divide, and they're going to make some antibodies and some memory cells. The antibodies are going to go ahead and deactivate the antigen so that it's no longer functioning and no longer can cause harm to the body. The memory cells are going to keep a record of how this was done so that we can be a lot quicker at handling the antigen the next time it enters the body. Now, after the antigen is deactivated, we can go ahead and destroy it. And we're going to do this through a process called phagocytosis. Phagocytosis is the process of engulfing something, engulfing a foreign body, and then destroying it, breaking it down. And if you remember, the two types of phagocytes that we have are neutrophils and macrophages. So they're going to be the ones that are going to perform the phagocytosis. Usually, the ones that we'll use are the neutrophils. The neutrophils are a lot quicker. They're a lot more efficient at breaking down, at engulfing the antigen and breaking it down. And so that's usually what the body will use. But if the antigen is too large for the neutrophil to engulf, then the macrophages will come in and do the job. But they're a lot slower, so we usually only leave them for when the neutrophils can't handle it. Now, after that, we have now deactivated the antigen, we've eaten it up and destroyed it. Then we have the T cells that are going to come in and basically do a final sweep, looking for anything that has been infected by the antigen. And it's going to go around and basically remove any little bit of residue that is left, destroy anything that was infected by the antigen. Now, there are sometimes conditions where the immune system isn't functioning properly. The first one is HIV. HIV is a virus that eventually develops into AIDS, and it's a condition where the body views the immune system as something that's bad, and so it starts to attack and disable the immune system so that it's no longer functioning properly. So these individuals are really, really vulnerable to illnesses. And so the best that you can do is really to make sure that you are as healthy as possible, avoid things that can lead to illnesses, things like food safety become really important, meaning cooking foods to the right temperature, avoiding cross-contamination. That's really the best thing that can be done in this type of situation, is making sure that you have good nutrition, good food safety to keep your body as healthy as possible and as distant from possible illnesses, since the body is not going to be able to handle illnesses very well. Now, we mentioned that normally the way the immune system works is that it stimulates the inflammation response, which is sending a blood supply to the injury site or the site of infection so that it can heal the situation. Now, this is good temporarily, but if you remember, we said, especially the elderly, a lot of times what happens is their immune system does not function properly, and so the inflammation basically becomes a prolonged state since the body is continuously trying to fight off the illness and the immune system isn't succeeding. And so the inflammation is basically a constant state, and that in itself can become really harmful. Now, to look at some of the things that can happen in a state of chronic inflammation, the main thing is going to be heart disease. One of the most common forms of heart disease is atherosclerosis, and this is usually when the body starts to develop plaques on the walls of the arteries, and that is something that can block blood flow. It can cause the arteries to become really narrow and really stiff, so that the blood flow is also restricted in that way. Now, what can happen is if the inflammation that we discussed is chronic, then what can happen is the inflammation can actually cause these plaques to burst. And when they burst, they can lodge in different places and cause some other major issues. One of the issues that can happen when we have this chronic inflammation is something called an aneurysm. And this is basically when we have, again, the chronic inflammation leading to excess blood flow going to the area where we have an injury. For example, if we have the plaques in the arteries, and what will end up happening is the blood vessel, the vein or the artery, will actually start to stretch and bulge. And this can be because of the excess blood flow going to that area, or also because the blood vessel is now a lot more narrow because of the plaques that have built up in it. And if this blood vessel continues to bulge and eventually bursts, that can be something that can lead to major internal bleeding and death. Another thing that can happen from inflammation is blood clots, and this can happen in two ways. First, we have when our arteries or veins get some kind of injury, some kind of tear. We stimulate the inflammation process to fix this by sending blood to the area, and the platelets in the blood will act as bandages and start to pile up on the injured site to close it up. Now, the problem with that is as those platelets build up to fix the site of injury, they actually form a blood clot, and that can block blood flow, which is what we call thrombosis. Another thing that can happen is it can actually, the buildup that we made can actually get dislodged or burst, and then it will continue to go through the bloodstream until it reaches a vein or artery that is too narrow for the clot to pass through. And so it ends up lodging in that narrow blood vessel and causing basically a block of blood flow. Another thing is blood pressure. When you have high blood pressure, you're putting stress on the veins and arteries that the blood is flowing through, and that extra strain on the veins and arteries stimulates the inflammation response, which in itself is going to again stimulate the plaque formation because the body is trying to heal the stretched out, torn portions of the arteries and veins. Now, we mentioned that diabetes can be a form of the immune system malfunctioning. In type 1 diabetes, the immune system is attacking the cells of the pancreas that make insulin. But regardless of whether it's type 1 or type 2, if the individual doesn't keep their blood sugar in check, we end up with much bigger issues. And these are the results of chronic uncontrolled diabetes. The first thing that the body will do is it will try to get rid of the excess glucose by converting it to sugar alcohols. Now, sugar alcohols are larger in structure and more complex. They aren't able to cross cell membranes as easily as glucose does. So they can actually end up building up in different places. One of those places can be behind the lens of an eye, and as they continue to build up there, they can form blurry vision. Another thing that the body can do is try to get rid of the glucose by attaching it onto protein structures. Now, the problem here is when we attach glucose to protein structures, we then call it a glycoprotein. And when it becomes a glycoprotein, it starts to lose its ability to function. And a lot of things in our body are made of protein. So for example, things like your blood cells, your blood vessels, your nerves, your nerve cells, all of those are made of protein. And if the glucose attaches to those, one of the things that can start affecting is the blood flow throughout your body. And if you have decreased blood flow, then one thing that can do is cause loss of different functions of organs in your body. If your body organs can't receive blood, they're not going to receive the nutrients to keep them functioning. So for example, one of the things that often happens with these individuals is the kidney no longer receives enough blood, and so the kidney is not receiving the nutrients it needs, and it stops functioning. So they start having kidney failure. Another thing that can happen is they have a harder time dealing with infections. Now, this happens for two reasons. The first thing is normally when we have an infection, we stimulate the inflammation response, which is sending blood to the area. If you have restricted blood flow because of your blood vessels, your blood cells being damaged, then you're not going to be able to send the blood necessary to the site of infection to help heal it. Another thing is when we have destruction of the nerve cells and the nerves in the body because protein attached to them. What often happens is the person starts to lose sensation in that area. If that happens in the feet of the person, often that can lead to foot amputations. And I'll explain to you why. Again, if you have restricted blood flow, one thing that's going to happen is the less blood that flows to a body area, the less sensation that you're going to have in that area. Another thing that can happen is if the nerves in that area become damaged because they're not able to function since the glucose attached to them, then your nerve cells not functioning will lead to less sensation in that area as well. So a lot of times individuals will not have much feeling in their feet because of the nerve cells being damaged, because of the lack of blood flow to their feet. And so if they, for example, stub their toe, if they get some kind of cut, they step on something, a lot of times, unless they're checking their feet regularly, they don't even notice that they injured their feet. And so they don't tend to their feet like they should. They leave it exposed and end up getting it infected. And since blood flow is not able to flow there as well to heal the infection goes out of control a lot quicker. And one thing that can end up happening is the cells in that area die off and the tissue starts to die, and eventually the foot needs to be amputated. Another issue that can affect the immune system is cancer. Now, cancer is something that has lots of different causes. Some of it is genetic, some of it is diet, exposure to toxins through the environment, and other lifestyle factors. But let's go ahead and take a look at how it develops, the different steps. So we start off with normal cells. And then something happens to cause a mutation in the DNA that allows the body to make an abnormal cell. Remember, the DNA is what tells us what amino acids we need to put together, what order we need to put them in to create something in the body. So if the DNA has some kind of mutation, some kind of error, it's going to tell the body to make whatever structure the wrong way. And so here we have the body telling the DNA telling the body to make a cell in the wrong way. So we end up with one abnormal cell, and that is the beginning of the cancer, which we call initiation. After that, we have the step of promotion, where that abnormal cell starts to divide and multiply, and that's when we say we have a tumor. Now, the tumor can continue to grow, and once it grows large enough, it can eventually reach an area in your body where it has access to your bloodstream. And once it has access to your bloodstream, the abnormal cells can enter the bloodstream, and then that allows them to be delivered anywhere in the body. The problem with that is when the abnormal cells travel throughout your body in the bloodstream, that is what allows the cancer to spread. So when you hear a cancer that begins in one part of the body and then is found in a completely different body part, that's because we have reached to this point of the process that we call metastasis, where the abnormal cells reach the bloodstream and were transported throughout the body in that way. Now, I mentioned that there are certain things that can cause cancer to develop. We obviously have genetics, but there are also other things that can promote cancer production that we can avoid. We mentioned avoiding toxins, so toxins in the environment, and then as well as alcohol, smoking, things of that nature. But also the types of foods that we eat can also increase our cancer risk. For example, when we cook meat at really high temperatures, it can actually form something called a carcinogen. Carcinogens are things that can lead to cancer production, especially red meats in particular. Also, if you grill meat on an open fire, what can happen is the fat from the meat is going to be dripping down into the fire. It will burn in the flame, and then the smoke will rise up from that and deposit into the meat. And that fat burning in the fire, the smoke that it produces has carcinogens in it. And so that's another thing that you want to avoid. If you are going to grill your meat, make sure you have something down that prevents the oil from dropping into the flame and then redepositing through the smoke evaporating. So for example, putting down some aluminum foil first on the grill and then the meat on top of that. Another thing is things like high starch foods like potatoes, for example. When you cook those at really high temperatures, they can also form a carcinogen in them as well. Things that can decrease cancer risk. We have things that can help increase your immune system. That's going to be the best option, because if you can build up your immune system when you have some kind of exposure to toxins that would normally start to damage your DNA and cause some kind of abnormal cells to develop, your body can fight that toxin before it's able to do that. And so that's going to be making sure that you're getting a lot of fruits and vegetables for the antioxidants, and then also fiber. Remember, fiber is something that can decrease colon cancer because it basically does a sweep of your intestines as it leaves your body.